Hi, welcome back, everybody. I am Rebecca Bratsby. I'm a professor at CUNY School of Law, and it is my honor to introduce Costa Constantinidis to you today, who will be our keynote speaker. Costa is my city council representative, and I have to say he's been an inspiring leader in our community, a true public servant. In addition to representing me, he represents the rest of New York City Council 22nd District, which includes Astoria, Rikers Island, parts of Jackson Heights, Woodside, and East Elmhurst. Since 2015, Costa has served as the chair of the Environmental Protection Committee of City Council. And in that capacity, he's led the fight to minimize the city's carbon footprint and to keep climate change from forever changing New York City's landscape. Sustainability, resilience, and air quality have long been his top environmental priorities. He grew up in Western Queens, watching power plants go up in Long Island City and Astoria, often next to public housing and always over the unified opposition of the community. A product of Astoria's public schools and Queens College, yay, Costa has prioritized educational equity, funding state-of-the-art hydroponic science labs in every school in his district. He also worked with the School Construction Authority to put solar panels on the solar-ready schools. And perhaps his crowning achievement, in April 2019, he led efforts to pass the Climate Mobilization Act, the largest carbon emissions reductions ever mandated by any city in the entire world. This bill tackles greenhouse gas emissions from large buildings and made the first steps towards closing fossil fuel power plants, including the ones in Western Queens. I could go on and on and on. I will just add that Costa was also the leading vision behind Renewable Rikers and had a major role in enacting the two environmental justice ordinances that we're very hopeful will reshape New York City's practices. So we're very lucky to have him with us today. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for all the work that you do at CUNY Law. We've been friends a long time, and I've seen the great work that you've done. And the Cure does a amazing comic book for young people teaching about air pollution and environmental justice. And that was my first introduction to PS 85 when my son first started going there. So thank you, Rebecca, and thank you to the entire consortium, led by Tari Hum from the Urban Studies Department here at Queens College. Thank you to the entire consortium for your amazing work throughout the borough of Queens, linking academia to environmental justice and sustainability, and all of the work that you do individually and as a collective to make our borough a better place. This today is an amazing opportunity for us to have these discussions. And without the vision that you've put forth, we would not be here today. So thank you, Tari. Thank you to everyone in the consortium for all of your work. Weeks and weeks of work went into today. And, it is a testament to your great, great work that you do, that this has come off and come together so well with so many diverse voices and so many people here today to discuss sustainability here in Queens. So thank you. As Rebecca said, my name is Costa Constantinidis. I am a product of Queens. I'm a product of Queens College. I am very lucky to be an adjunct lecturer here at the college as well, teaching climate change and public policy in the Urban Studies Department. But I love that work, and I love being involved at Queens College because I love being connected to the students. I love being connected to those who are going to be shaping the future of our borough, and helping to give them just a little bit of nuggets here and there to help them on that journey. As people gave me nuggets through my journey to make, sort of shape my mind and shape my future. So I am really glad to be back at Queens College and be part of this. So in my role as a city council member, I've been very lucky to work on issues that matter and work on issues that we've passed 42 bills relating to combating climate change in the almost 8 years that I've been in the council. And the main takeaway from all this, and we've done some big things. We've done the largest emissions reduction policy in the country with Local Law 97. reducing emissions from large buildings. We've set the path, and Rebecca was a huge part of that. Rebecca Bratsky's, and I'll talk about this later on, was a huge part of the Renewable Rikers Act, and making sure that happened. But we've now have law that, August of 2027, DOC has to be off the island. And now we're conducting energy studies and wastewater treatment studies. These bills will help us put on a path to renewable Rikers Island. We've done work on environmental justice issues. But what is coming next? And how do we do this together? And what role does academia have in that future? I feel is really what I want to focus on today. And as we look to the future, there are a lot of bright spots, but there are also a lot of challenges. The International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has stated that we have 9 more years to really make an impact on reducing emissions to not hit that 2 degrees Celsius mark. That would be catastrophic for the future of our planet. At 2 degrees Celsius, our coral reefs disappear. Most of our ice in the Antarctic disappears. But more than that, sea level rise accelerates to a point where the borough of Queens, the borough that we inhabit, the borough that we know and love, will cease to look the way it does today. And what does that mean? It's not just about land, but it's about the people who live there. The Rockaways that were impacted by Hurricane Sandy, the same residents who are dealt with COVID at the highest numbers, could potentially see their homes disappear from sunny day flooding by 2050. Our borough, the borough that we know, and the men and women who on the Rockaways, they can ill afford to move. They're the same residents who, in public housing, who are dealing with boiler issues and issues of environmental injustice every day. And yet they are going to be the ones that are going to that see their neighborhoods disappear from the map. So what can we do? And how do we make Queens more sustainable? And how do we link our universities, our academia, to this work? Well, I can sort of give you a sort of blueprint from my past, how we've come up with legislation. And I'll say that I've had the great pleasure of working with many of the leaders in the consortium and in making good policy for the city of New York. We need each other. And these conversations, the Climate Mobilization Act and Renewable Rikers Island did not happen in a vacuum. They happened by working with neighborhood organizations like the ones that are speaking here today. They came together by working with professors and academia. And by putting all of these pieces together, that's how we got good policy. Now, here's a couple of examples. Several years ago in 2017, we begun work on the Climate Mobilization Act. And we really wanted to make sure that we didn't pit sustainability against affordability, right? No one should have to choose between whether or not their home is sustainable or whether or not they can afford to live there. And under the old rent laws in New York State, a landlord could seek something called an MCI, a major capital improvement, that could be permanent. Even after the payback, even after the work that they've done on the building has paid itself back, these MCIs could impact tenants in the long term. So we spent 2+ years in that legislation, working with organizations like New York's Communities for Change, working with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, working with organizations like We Act for Environmental Justice, working with organizations, all across the spectrum throughout the city. And we brought everyone to the table. We brought stakeholders from real estate, the co-op boards, the environmental justice groups. We brought environmental organizations. We brought neighborhood organizations. We brought so many organizations into this conversation. And we were able to find a mechanism where we still were doing the largest emissions reduction policy in the history of New York City. And the reason we did these buildings were that these are large buildings, the iconic buildings that we see in New York City, right? The ones that are 25,000 square feet or above. There are only about 50,000 of them, but they accounted for 30% of the city's emissions. So we all knew that these were the buildings we had to start with, because these emissions were almost a third of the city's overall emissions. But how did we get there? We got there by making sure that rent-regulated housing had alternative compliance, so there were no MCIs. We got there by crafting an aggressive but achievable mechanism for building owners to meet the emission standards for 2024 and 2030. We passed legislation for PACE financing, so they could borrow against their savings. We built in free technical support for building owners through OBE, the Office of Building Energy Emissions Performance. We built in a retrofit accelerator that so far has helped 5,000 buildings go green in the city of New York, and now is going to be accelerated. We're going to accelerate the accelerator. Sorry for the bad joke. But we are going to make sure we do that. But we got there by working with people who are on the ground doing these types of things. They're working on environmental issues in their own communities. They understand that the asthma rates are too high. They understand. Rachel Rivera from New York Community for Change was a strong voice. And she talked about how during Hurricane Sandy, her apartment started to get flooded, and she had to grab her daughter and run out of their apartment. And just as they left, the apartment filled with water. To this day, her daughter still has PTSD every time it rains. And those stories from organizations and residents of the community need to be heard, and should be heard when we're making policy, because they understand the impacts of climate change in a way that is visceral and has happened to them more than just intellectual. When I talk about the Renewable Rikers Act, well, how did that come about? Well, the Lippman Commission put together a report talking with formerly incarcerated men and women from Rikers Island, from the Freedom Agenda. Men and women like Marcos Barrios, Kendra Clark, Vidal Guzman. I had the opportunity to sit with them and hear their stories about how Rikers had impacted their life and the horrors that Rikers Island brought on their entire persona, and their strong desire to see it close, but also their strong desire to see justice. And in the Lippman report, there was a section about potential uses. And they talked about a possibility of making this an environmental sort of renewable resource. And when I sat down with the Freedom Agenda and the Lippman Commission, we posed the question, what if we looked at closing Rikers Island through an environmental justice prism? And what could be the future there? And we sat down together and began working with organizations like NEJA, New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and We Act for Environmental Justice, and NILP, New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, and NRDC, National Resources Defense Council. But also, I turned to my good friend, Rebecca Bratsby, who I was doing amazing work, as I talked about earlier, at CUNY Law School, and asked her if she would be a partner in helping to look at the possibilities of renewable Rikers. And with her law students, they put together an amazing report. So this was back in 2018, just as we were starting to get things moving on the Climate Mobilization Act. And Rebecca took the ball and ran with it. And CUNY students got it done, right? CUNY, Rebecca and her students worked together to come up with a great report. And in December of 2018, they came to me with the idea and the vision that they've sort of done some looking into this and spent almost a year studying this, and that 100 acres of solar could be enough power to close every dirty power plant that's opened in the last 20 years. how did those dirty power plants get there? Well, they got there, Enron, this horrible company that was just horrible in so many ways, stealing people's money. But this entity was thinking about, rolling blackouts in California and was talking about how we need more reliable energy. Well, here in New York State, we had George Pataki at the time in a Republican state Senate. So they decided to build 11 power plants in New York State that were only supposed to be opened for 3 years. So since they were only going to be open for 3 years, there was no need for an environmental impact statement. There was no need to speak to the residents in which these communities who were going to be impacted. There was no reason to have these conversations because they were only going to be open for 3 years, and they were critical to our reliability. I don't believe that they were. We all know that now. But what do these plants do? Well, every time a peaker plant clicks on and off, PM 2.5, nitrous oxide, sulfur oxide, these are the things that get in your lungs and cause asthma. And where were they all placed? They were all placed in environmental justice neighborhoods. Here in Queens, these plants were placed next to, in the Ravenswood generating plant, they were placed next to the Queensbridge houses right across the street. Down the block is the Ravenswood houses. And further down the block is the Astoria houses. As you go further north in Astoria, you have the NRG plant. You have Astoria generating. You had Paletti in the early 2010s, which is the dirtiest plant in New York State, which has since been replaced as the dirtiest plant in New York State by the Ravenswood generating plant. And those, but those peakers were all placed in these environmental justice neighborhoods. And they were only supposed to be open for 3 years, but they were kept open past their time. They were kept, they're still open today. And what does that mean for those communities? Well, the asthma rates, and working with organizations in the community, that's how I got this data. The Queens Asthma Project showed us that the residents of 1101, 1102, 1106 have higher than the borough average for asthma rates. And they go to the emergency room and are hospitalized more for asthma across the board. Not just children, not just seniors, not just vulnerable populations, but everyone in these zip codes are going to the hospital more for ER visits and hospitalizations. So there was a cost, a human cost to these decisions, and a human cost for the placing them in environmental justice neighborhoods. But to Governor Pataki, he didn't care. But the Renewable Rikers Act and Rebecca Bratsby's and her team postulated that we could close almost all of these plants through battery storage and solar on Rikers Island, that we could capture millions of gallons of sewage through wastewater treatment. We could do anaerobic digestion. And thus, in January of 2019, we unveiled the idea of the Renewable Rikers Act. And then we got, then we took additional dollars, and then when we want to get CUNY, right? CUNY gets things done. So I got an opportunity to work with Sustainable CUNY and commission another study to see how much energy we could actually produce. And they looked at it and said, well, if, with only 4% of the island being covered in batteries, like battery storage, with the solar array, we could create about 1,520 megawatts of power. That is a big number. That's enough to close down those plants. So where do we go? But by working with Sustainable CUNY, I wouldn't have this data. And once we had the data, I had engineering firms from all over the country coming to meet with us. And they were saying, well, you guys are right on track here. Here are all the things that we could potentially do. These are entities that are sort of do wastewater treatment throughout the world. They do solar power throughout the world, and saying, here are renditions of what we think this could look like. Here's how where the solar could be. Here's how anaerobic digestion, and we could actually have enough anaerobic digestion for all of the organics in New York City, organics collection could all go to Rikers Island. You know, they built on the work from academia here in Queens. And without Sustainable CUNY, and without Rebecca Bratsby's and her team, and without organizations like We Act for Environmental Justice and NEJA and NILPI and the Freedom Agenda and NRDC and the Lippman Commission, without these partnerships, you know, we wouldn't have had the place to start. So in 2020, we had a hearing in the City Council, and we were ready to pass the bills, and then COVID hit. And then we dealt with the impacts of COVID. And once we were able to kind of get things rolling again, it was again organizations organizing Zoom events, right? Because we had gone to previously, we had done an event in Jackson Heights. We had done events in the Astoria houses. We had done events with the residents of the Queensbridge houses on why this was important. We organized with the tenant leaders there. We organized with Urban Upbound and had these conversations and with Freedom Agenda or the organizations that were involved. But then these organizations and I worked together yet again to kind of kickstart this back, you know, this conversation, because now we're in a period of austerity. The city is not in a good financial place. There were lots of reasons why we couldn't do this. But the imperative was that we did need to do this. So, you know, we again worked together, and they called council members, and the League of Conservation Voters put the bills on their scorecard. And, you know, we had organizations, you know, calling their legislators, asking them to support the Renewable Rikers Act. And through this collective work, we were able to organize and get these bills back on the track to get moving again. And last month, we were able to pass all three. But we had to do it as a team. I mean, I'm proud to be the legislator that carried these bills. But this was a teamwork with CUNY and neighborhood organizations working together, providing data back and forth with one another, partnerships with one another to inform legislation that passed and will help us put Rikers Island on a path to a renewable future. So as we look to the next frontier, and I know I only have a few minutes left, as we look to the future and think about what's next for Queens, and we think about what the next 9 years of policy looks like, these partnerships have to be strong. You know, putting an event like this together, I know that we're possibly looking to do another one in the future, but we need to continue these partnerships. You know, the next frontiers are, you know, how do we stop natural gas hookups for new buildings? How do we make sure that workers aren't being displaced? How do we have a just transition to ensure that workers are not being left behind? Right? Because I've seen when the mayor announced the no new gas hookups, I saw a press release from the plumbers tearing this apart, because to them, they're not involved with fossil fuels. They don't think of themselves as fossil fuel entities. They think of themselves as plumbers. But plumbers do gas hookups. They do boiler hookups for heat and hot water. Well, now they're going to be displaced from doing that work. And Local 3, when we electrify buildings, are thrilled about that announcement, because they're going to be the entities doing electrification. But how do we make sure there's a just transition, that no workers are left behind? How do we make sure that we're training for renewable Rikers? We're training the men and women who are impacted by the horrors on Rikers. We created a Rikers Island Advisory Committee that are going to have men and women who are formerly incarcerated, families impacted by Rikers on that committee. But how do we make sure that the men and women who are formerly incarcerated are able to get those good jobs and training to build renewable Rikers and build a middle-class future for themselves and beyond through the closure and renewal of renewable Rikers? How do we take the next step and go from the large buildings, building a mechanism to see every building in Queens go green? It's going to take money. It's going to take data. It's going to take, how do we do this in an orderly way? And if we're able to figure all those things out together, that's the future of this borough. We could be, we are the potentially, not that I'm here to advocate that Queens goes its own way, right? I'm not here today to say that we should, secede from the city of New York. But let's be honest, with the 2.5 million people that inhabit Queens, we would be the 4th or 5th largest city in the entire country. By 2030, we need to be the largest city in the country that's completely renewable and completely carbon neutral. So we need all hands on deck here. We need to be having the conversations on land use. We need to be having the conversations around coastal resiliency. And I don't have enough time to talk about all the bills that we have resiliency, but we have an entire coalition that we're working with, the Rise to Resilience Coalition, that's talking about the need for a 5-borough resiliency plan, a climate indicators bill, looking at the indicators in communities and seeing how we can better track those indicators for resiliency purposes, and also having guidelines for capital projects. So we have 3 of those bills and an entire coalition of, again, organizations and communities, Waterfront Alliance, and so on, working on these issues together. But we need to have conversations around public health, because all this is connected to health. So these conversations are going to be done together with community organizations, people on the ground, men and women who live in our neighborhoods, and with academia, in partnership with one another. So that's what's so inspiring about this consortium today and this panel discussion, is that we are strengthening those bonds, building new bonds with one another, and setting the stage for the next 9 years of really digging in and making sustainability and environmental justice and resiliency core to everything that we do, and making sure that we are doing that and doing that into the future. So, again, I want to thank everyone for being here today, for being part of this great event. I want to thank Tari and everyone in the consortium for putting this together and working so very hard to make this. This was not done. This was supposed to be an in-person conference. This was supposed to be, there were lots of things it was supposed to be, but then COVID changed all of our lives. And to see this seamlessly go through today is a testament to the weeks and weeks and weeks of work that all of the professors who were part of this consortium, from York College and LaGuardia Community College and Queens College and Queensborough College, that everyone put in today to make this a reality. So again, I want to thank you for your weeks of hard work to bring us all together here, and know that, even though I'm not going to be a council member for much longer, as this is the last year of my term and I'm term limited out, I'm going to be sharing in this partnership as a citizen, as a part of the Queens College community, as someone whose son has asthma, as someone who was impacted by COVID himself and dealing with all those health impacts. I'm going to be with you all every step of the way, because I'm not planning on leaving Queens, despite me leaving the council. So I look forward to the many great partnerships and friendships that are going to be sprouted from today, and look forward to a brighter future, and renewable future, and sustainable future for the borough of Queens. Thank you. And I know that Tari, it's hard for me to see the chat because I'm on my phone, because my internet was not prepared for all of this, but I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Terrific. We have a question. Thank you so much, Costa, for that inspiring talk, and for lying grossly about me. So we have a question about whether you would be willing to talk about your recent op-ed about the Mayor's Sustainability Office.
Sure. Here is one of my big concerns. There is a Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and there's a Mayor's Office of Resiliency and Recovery, but they are mayoralties. What that means is they are under the mayor's umbrella, and it's very difficult for city council members to look into the work that they do. Well, what did we just discover about a month ago? Well, at a hearing, I got a tip that the Mayor's Office of Resiliency and Recovery was not funded. So I asked the question at the hearing, how is your funding source? Well, apparently the Mayor's Office for Resiliency and Recovery was funded through a Sandy grant. And the Sandy grant is going to disappear next year. So it is possible that in 2022, we will not have an Office of Resiliency and Recovery. Now, at a time when Queens is, and all of New York City is getting impacted by climate change, and the bill is going to come due regardless, we're going to have a brain drain, right? Because people are going to look at their future and say, if I know my job is not going to be here in a year, I'm going to start looking for something else because they have families to feed just like everyone else. We could see that office disappear or be decimated. So I did a letter with Justin Brannan, who's the chair of the Resiliency Committee, that we need to find money in this year's budget to permanently fund the Mayor's Office of Resiliency and Recovery. But more than that, you know, it's only $2.7 million. That's a half of a park bathroom. Park bathrooms now, if you want to renovate a park bathroom, it's $5 million. So we spend $2.7 million a year on resiliency in the city of New York. That's a frightening number. I think we have to supercharge all of this. And by the way, the Mayor's Office of Sustainability is only $17 million. So we're spending total of an $89 billion budget. We're spending $20 million only on resiliency and recovery. That's a really frightening number to me. So I think personally, we have to supercharge these efforts. We have to create a full Department of Sustainability to help do things like implement Local Law 97, to implement Renewable Rikers Island, to lead the charge on resiliency, to make sure we're getting the right numbers from the federal government. Now we have a federal government who cares, to create, to think about these issues of no new gas hookups and how do we get every building in New York City to go renewable. We need a Department of Sustainability, the first of its kind. It'll be the first Department of Sustainability in the country. But it should be in New York City. So I have a bill to have the Department of Sustainability that would merge the Mayor's Office of Sustainability and the Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency, make it one large department. Oh, and by the way, by having a department, it would also be their funding sources to be fully transparent to not both the city council and the public. So I wouldn't have to find out by accident again if something's being underfunded, because we'd have oversight hearings and budget hearings. I could never call them as a witness during my budget hearing this month. My budget hearing's on Monday. All I have to talk about is with DEP, because it's the only department that I have oversight on their budget. So in addition to all the great work the Department of Sustainability does, at least the city council can publicly talk about their budgets. And budgets matter because budgets are priorities in city government.
Thank you very much. I wish we had more time. I think that we're going to feel that way for every single panel today. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.